And here they come.
Protecting the President of the United States.
A feeling of pride.
But the audience loves this.
For Secret Service agents,
It's a brotherhood.
the round-the-clock sacrifice means laying down your life in harm's way.
You knew it was an important job, but you couldn't let it get to you too much.
Special Agent Winston Lawson was assigned to the Kennedy detail after serving President Eisenhower.
I missed a lot of birthdays. I missed a lot of Christmases, 4th of Julys, that type of thing.
Agent Lawson would immediately grow fond of the newly minted president.
He was pleasant. He was businesslike.
President still walking along that inside fence.
Keeping the affable young President Kennedy safe, however, who enjoyed mingling with adoring fans, posed potential problems for his sworn protectors.
They would be clapping or cheering or yelling, whatever.
I choose this as our goal.
When he wasn't guarding the president, Wynne would often be tasked with drawing up security measures ahead of presidential trips.
You're watching people that didn't seem to be right.
We choose to go to the moon.
His colleagues considered Wynne to be the most precise and thorough advance agent on staff.
Ich bin ein Berliner.
Agent Lawson would plan Mr. Kennedy's celebrated trip abroad to Ireland and Berlin. But nothing could prepare the 35-year-old agent for what he would experience in Dallas, Texas.
I can hardly believe it's been 50 years.
For Lawson, President Kennedy's fateful trip on November 22, 1963, still haunts and hurts.
That's a jet.
5 days before the president arrives in Texas,
I did the advance for his trip there.
Special Agent Lawson meets with Dallas police. Wynne would be the architect of security, handling crowd control and determining President Kennedy's motorcade route.
I mean, you started at the airport that he was going to arrive at.
There's Mrs. Kennedy.
When the first couple step out of Air Force One that Friday morning,
Love Field.
Special Agent Lawson stands nervously beside them, waiting to launch his plan.
He just knew that he'd go over along the airport fence, for example, and shake hands with people because he always did.
Smiling. Secret Service men all around.
The number of supporters at Love Field would be dwarfed, though, by what was waiting along the route.
Oh, it was just enormous crowds.
Agent Lawson would climb into this white unmarked police car for the trip through Dallas.
The presidential limousine followed the car I was in.
The crowd swelled to 10 deep at points along the route.
Part of the time you're looking at the buildings that you're passing, the people on the sidewalk.
The president is minutes away from delivering his speech at the Dallas Trade Mart before 2,500 anxious guests. But Mr. Kennedy would never arrive.
The president's car is now turning onto Elm Street.
The president's limousine enters Dealey Plaza right in front of the school book depository.
The main crowds were about God.
Suddenly, a distinct crack fills the air.
It was rifle shots, yes.
It appears as though something has happened in the motorcade route. Something, I repeat, has happened in the motorcade route.
In seconds, sheer jubilation gives way to utter chaos.
Over the radio came a report that the president had been shot.
Parkland Hospital has been advised to stand by for a severe gunshot wound.
President's convertible Lincoln surges toward the hospital.
I jumped out of the car and went back to his car.
Wynne Lawson would be the first person who burst through the doors at Parkland.
The president was hit in the head.
Agent Lawson returns to the president's limo with 2 stretchers and witnesses the grisly scene.
Someone put a suit coat over his head.
Wynne helps lift the gravely wounded president out of the back seat.
And then we were able to get him out, put him on a gurney.
Wynne stands shoulder to shoulder with the First Lady as they watch doctors and nurses try frantically to save her 46-year-old husband's life in Trauma Room 1.
He really didn't do an awful lot. There was an awful lot they could do. This part of his head right here was all gone.
Agent Lawson knows the doctor's attempts are futile.
He was quite gray. I was convinced in my own mind that he wasn't going to make it.
The president of the United States is dead.
30 minutes after the fatal shot was fired, the unthinkable is announced at 1 p.m.
President Kennedy has been assassinated. It's official now.
Total devastation.
A hush falls over the ER. Agent Lawson doesn't have time to mourn his boss's passing.
I went with the motorcade that took the coffin out to the airport and helped put the coffin on Air Force One.
That was Oswald.
Wynn would stay behind in Texas and watch Lee Harvey Oswald deny killing the president. He would also help carry the accused assassin's rifle back to Washington. 3 days following the assassination, Wynn Lawson would provide security at JFK's funeral.
I was at the cemetery, pretty close to the grave site. It was a terrible tragedy for that family.
So many years later, Wynn still struggles with one regret.
I never got to say anything to the children, but looking back, I wish I had been able to talk to them about how sorry I was that it happened.
Following the assassination, President Kennedy's murder became a taboo subject in the Secret Service.
We didn't say anything to one another, and didn't for years.
Reflecting on the American tragedy, a half-century after President Kennedy's death, Wynn still replays the events from that day.
At times I wish I'd never been born.
The pain may have diminished somewhat, but the 86-year-old retired agent still harbors some deep-rooted guilt over the death of JFK.
I cried an awful lot in the years, but it happened. I've just gone on with my life.
Secret Service agent Winston Lawson, a link to one of the most infamous episodes in U.S. history, a crime he prays never to see repeated.
I'm the only agent in history of the Secret Service that didn't advance where the president was killed. And to this day, it's the same thing. I'm still the only one. Thank God.
From the very beginning.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you.
Sid Davis.
Ask what you can do for your country.
Enjoyed his front row seat watching U.S. history unfold.
Pretty obvious to us that this was a magical figure.
Good evening, my fellow citizens.
Covering the Kennedy White House, the correspondent for Westinghouse Broadcasting observes grace under fire in the Oval Office.
The size of this undertaking.
I was in that night when he made the speech to Khrushchev and he said, "Get the missiles out of Cuba."
Davis vividly remembers Americans falling for their very own royal couple.
She was stunning, and the audience just went crazy, and she loved it.
In November of 1963, the former crime reporter from Ohio would follow JFK during his ill-fated two-day five-city trip.
This is Sid Davis with the presidential party in Texas.
Most in the Lone Star State are waiting with open arms.
As the president and his wife kind of moving along the gate.
The crowd at the airport was wonderful. They gave her a huge bouquet of roses.
On board the press bus, Sid joins the presidential motorcade through the teeming streets of Dallas.
We were about 80 feet behind the presidential limousine.
The president is speaking in Republican Dallas this afternoon.
Moments after the president reaches Dealey Plaza, Sid and the other journalists are jolted by a loud crack.
There were three distinct shots, no question about it. We didn't know who they hit. All we saw was that the crowd started to run, people scattered.
Sid doesn't know an assassin's bullet cuts down President Kennedy.
We looked up ahead and we saw everything scattering, and we saw the presidential limousine just disappear. It was chaos. All hell broke loose.
Give me a quick level. Okay, 1, 2, 3.
Minutes later, Sid and other journalists converge on Parkland Hospital and wait anxiously for updates on JFK's condition.
So we're now going to switch you to Sid Davis at the hospital in Dallas.
That security pretty well established by the time I got there. They wouldn't let reporters in the emergency room area.
Sid works frantically, filtering fact from fiction.
We do not have information here at the hospital because of the chaotic situation.
Minutes after arriving at Parkland, Sid listens to the announcement nobody expected or wanted to hear.
And he said, President John F. Kennedy
died at 1 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time today here in Dallas.
I ran for the phones.
But Sid,
give me a quick level. Okay, 1, 2, 3.
would not finish covering the biggest story of his career at Parkland Hospital.
15 seconds to go, Sid. 15 seconds.
In the middle of filing reports, a White House staffer orders Sid to climb into an unmarked police car.
Where are we going? I can't tell you.
Destination Love Field. As a pool reporter on board Air Force One, Sid was about to witness yet another momentous event.
The vice president will be sworn in as president within a few minutes.
Mr. Davis watches LBJ take the oath of office with Jackie Kennedy standing by his side.
The blood on her stockings had congealed.
Sid Davis would also appear in one of the most iconic photos ever taken.
That's me right there. I'm writing my notes.
Other reporters hungry for the story wait on the tarmac for Sid's detailed account.
But it was probably the saddest thing I've ever seen.
The story I gave them was the first word flashed to the world that Lyndon Johnson was now president.
With the nation in mourning, Sid arrives back at the White House later that night.
We are awaiting the arrival of the president's body.
Throughout the long ordeal, Sid holds his emotions in check, but eventually, the weight of that dark day finally takes its toll.
Mrs. Kennedy has chosen to ride in the hearse with the casket.
Sid would sign off his coverage, quoting one of JFK's favorite poets, Robert Frost.
That's where I just fell apart. 4:22 a.m., November the 23rd, 1963. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have
promises to keep and many miles to go before I sleep. And with that, this is Sid Davis reporting from the White House. The President and First Lady.
When President Kennedy arrives in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963,
The crowd is absolutely going wild.
an estimated 200,000 Texans turn out to greet him.
And it dawned on me, I'd read in the paper that the president was going to be in town.
What a tremendous welcome he's getting now.
While throngs of spectators try shaking a hand or catching a glimpse of the first couple, history is waiting for an unsuspecting person along the route.
He was coming directly towards me.
One man who has no interest in seeing JFK.
The only thing I can say that made my life interesting.
James Tague is running late for a lunch date with his girlfriend.
Got stopped, didn't quite get out from under the triple underpass.
The 27-year-old finds himself stuck in gridlock traffic.
And so I got out of my car to see what was going on, walked into the open of Dealey Plaza.
James decides to wait on the side of the road.
Yeah, that's me standing right there.
This is a friendly crowd in downtown Dallas.
The president's convertible then turns onto Elm Street.
About that time, here comes this car with flags on the front fenders.
Just then, James would hear what sounds like fireworks.
Then the crack of two rifle shots, and I felt something sting me in the face.
A piece of concrete or bullet fragment fired from an assassin's rifle slams into James's right cheek.
I stood there stunned, watched the motorcade for a second, ducked behind the cement.
A police officer notices James's injury.
I reached up, and sure enough, there was blood. I remember being stunned.
Officers order James to fill out a report at the police station. James then notices a person in handcuffs.
And the detective says, "Who you got there?" He says, "Well, this is the man that killed a policeman over an Oak Cliff."
No, I've not been charged with that.
Turns out that suspect would be Lee Harvey Oswald.
Right after the presidential car had turned the corner,
The Warren Commission would hear his testimony in July of 1964.
This is where it happened.
This is it. This is where Kennedy was killed.
Along with President Kennedy and Governor Conley, Tague would be the only other person wounded on Dealey Plaza that horrendous day.
Well, I didn't let it affect me. I did not. That could have happened to anybody.
Even as we reach this milestone 50th anniversary, James still finds his place as an obscure footnote in the history books, a bit surreal.
It's been 50 years, and I'm still trying to accept what happened. I'm trying to accept the fact that I was here and part of it.
Southbound side.
Traffic jams in Dallas
That's causing a slow-moving backup.
aren't always caused by cars and SUVs.
I will always be enjoying interest in President Kennedy.
Foot traffic clogs the sidewalks in one particular part of town every November.
You feel it.
Especially this year.
The president's car is now turning onto Elm Street.
At the corner of Elm and Houston.
So this is where everyone went afterwards.
Camera-toting visitors like the Beckers from Goochland gather to reflect.
That's cool. I remember when it happened, my mom sitting on the sofa crying. I do remember that.
Something has happened in the motorcade route. Stand by, please.
The past is drawing Ed and Carolyn to Dealey Plaza, where President Kennedy was assassinated in 1963. From the grassy knoll and old book depository building to alleged assassin Lee Harvey Oswald's gravesite and the former Hotel Texas, where President Kennedy would deliver his last speech.
And the crowd is absolutely going wild.
Tourists yearn to see the sites tied to the infamous crime, an event seared into their memory.
This is a friendly crowd in downtown Dallas.
I was 11 years old when it all happened. I remember it very well.
Painted X's on Elm Street on Dealey Plaza mark the spots where bullets struck the president, providing a macabre photo op.
In a way, it gives me still a sad feeling.
As the 50th anniversary approaches, some people with personal ties to the assassination are returning too.
This is where it happened.
This is it. This is where Kennedy was killed.
Texan James Tagg was the third person wounded that dreadful day when a piece of concrete or bullet hit him in the face.
Yeah, that's me standing right there.
James says his hometown has never quite fully recovered.
The city's got a bad name about it because they tried to act like it didn't happen.
Overlooking Dealey, the sixth-floor museum, where 1,600 visitors a day peer out of the same windows used by Oswald.
Deep grief, of course, not only affected the city, but the nation and the world.
The museum's executive director, Nicola Longford, says the exhibit can be a place of healing.
In spite of a tragic event, we are confronting this terrible event, and it's helping the community come together.
He and Mrs. Kennedy.
Former CBS anchor Dan Rather was in Dallas and led the network's coverage during that tumultuous time.
I do have very vivid memories of the day, but some memories are beginning to fade.
Walter, we have some additional film.
Rather says the assassination took but a few seconds, but altered the lives of so many forever.
It changed me as a person, it changed me as a professional. You can't go through that kind of experience and come out the other end the same person.
There has been an attempt, as perhaps you know now, on the life of President Kennedy.
Here is a special bulletin from Dallas, Texas.
The imagery that you see in this exhibit is stunning and amazing 50 years later.
It is arguably the most notorious murder in American history.
Two priests who were with the president have reported that the president is dead.
The assassination of President John F. Kennedy
some 38 minutes ago
in Dallas, Texas.
This moment was when the nation forever became a television nation.
Here is a bulletin from CBS News.
The museum's JFK, 3 shots were fired, explores the killing of Kennedy and the chaotic hours and days that followed through precious artifacts and rare news footage of this unspeakable moment. Senior Manager of Exhibit Development,
absolutely,
Patty Rule.
Many reporters that we talked to said, I will never, ever forget that day. There's not a moment in my career that will ever surpass the reporting, the work that was done that day.
That's an unconfirmed report that the president was hit in the head.
For the first time since that dreadful day in November of 1963, you can inspect evidence never before seen, locked away in the National Archives for 50 years.
Did you kill the president?
No, I've not been charged with that. In fact, nobody has said that to me yet.
Visitors can stand inches away from Lee Harvey Oswald's jacket and the shirt he was wearing when police arrested the accused assassin inside the Texas Theater. A military drum played during President Kennedy's funeral procession. The pistol belonging to Secret Service agent Clint Hill. And journalists' tools of the trade, including correspondent Sid Davis's reporter's notebook.
This is Sid Davis reporting from the Dallas airport.
We were about 80 feet behind the presidential limousine.
Davis was riding in the presidential motorcade when the assassin pulled the trigger.
The reason why we heard it so clearly is that the press bus was underneath that window.
An hour and a half later, Davis would also witness the swearing-in ceremony.
That's me right there.
Of President Lyndon Johnson aboard Air Force One.
We are told that the vice president will be sworn in as president within a few minutes.
The 86-year-old would time the momentous occasion with this watch.
36 words, 28 seconds.
Also on view, this Bell & Howell 8mm camera Abraham Zapruder was operating when the shots rang out.
This is the camera that took the 26 seconds of film that captured the entire assassination, probably the most famous 26 seconds of film in history.
The President of the United States is dead.
The darkened exhibit space evokes still vivid memories and taps emotions that for some are still too raw.
Yep.
Freddie Franklin from North Carolina.
Yep.
Was in his 20s serving in the Air Force when he first learned about the death of the inspiring young president.
I think everybody had deep feelings for the Kennedys. He was a good man, and he was for all the people.
For Freddie, the exhibit proves too much.
Well, actually, when I started walking through, I couldn't stand and watch it. I just had to walk through and take a quick glance and keep going, because I couldn't take it. I couldn't take it.
For many who remember Camelot,
there was no one like him.
President John F. Kennedy represented a new beginning.
We choose to go to the moon.
Which made his untimely death even more painful.
He was energetic. He was forward-looking.
Like so many visitors, Canadian Heather McLaren can recall exactly where she was and what she was doing the moment she heard the shocking news.
And I was just devastated. I can still feel emotions. I can imagine myself right there.
3 shots were fired. A painful journey, whether you lived through it or not.
It's not just for the generations who are alive at that time. It's for people today who are trying to understand this moment in American history.
A dark, complex moment some people are still wrestling with 50 years later.
I guess the big question is why? Why would anyone want to kill Kennedy? You couldn't think of any reason why.